going on, guys? Snake Eyes here, playing some more Dark Souls 2. And in this video we're going to be doing a weapon showcase, and the weapon we're going to be showcasing today is the Ashen Warrior Sword. Now if you don't know how to get this weapon, keep in mind that you do need the second DLC, Crown of the Old Iron King, to get it. All you have to do once you get in that DLC is farm the Ashen Warriors that are using this weapon. Keep in mind that there are a lot of different types of Ashen Warriors. Some use bows, some use the battle axes. You have to farm the ones that are using this weapon, otherwise you will not get this weapon. Keep that in mind. But that's pretty much how you get this weapon. Now we're going to go into the details of it. Since then I've upgraded mine to plus 10 and my base damage is at 180. I also get a 100 base damage in bleed. It does 110 in the counter strength. It does 25 poise damage per hit. It has 30 durability and it weighs 3 pounds. The requirements for this weapon is that you need 10 strength and 18 dexterity, and it gets a C scaling in strength and a B scaling in dex. Now there are a couple of pros and cons to this weapon, and just really quickly I am going to go over the cons. One of the major cons for me, and this might not be a con for you, is the simple fact that it comes with built-in bleed damage. Now the reason I always list that as a con is because there's pretty much only 1 or 2 weapons that are actually really good with the bleed built in. One of them is the claws, and the only reason that it's really good with the claws is because the base damage on the claws suck anyway, so applying bleed is something that you can actually do. With this weapon, once you upgrade it to plus 10 or pretty high up there, it does a decent enough damage to where bleed is probably irrelevant. You're more than likely going to kill the person before you even apply the bleed, so for me that's definitely a con. Another con, and this is probably going to be on a case-by-case situation, was for me it was really hard to get. Now just like the possessed armored sword, it took me a little over an hour, maybe even a little bit more. I wasn't really keeping track, but it took me a really long time to get this weapon. I pretty much ran through all the spawns of the Ashen Warriors that were using this weapon, and when I finally got it I was actually pretty happy. Again, this is a case-by-case situation. Some of you guys might already have it and it didn't even take any farming. Some of you guys might have to farm a really long time, but I figured I'd list it anyways because even the wikis say that it is a pretty rare drop. And like I said, for those who have gotten it without really even farming for it, consider yourselves pretty lucky because I took a very long time in getting this weapon. With that being said, one of the major pros that I can think of this weapon is that basically, and before I start, this isn't really a pro for me, but I will list it mainly because it is something that you can't ignore, is that this is a straight up upgrade from the Foot Soldier sword. Now the reason I say it's not really a pro for me is because I never used that sword anyways, but for people who picked it up, for people who used it, for people who like it, they can pick this weapon up and know that basically what they're getting is an upgraded version from that weapon. And I'm pretty sure that if there is at least one person who used it and liked it, they will pick this weapon up and they'll have the same type of success, and they'll also really like this weapon as well. Another pro, and this does apply to me, is that this has the exact same moveset that the Sun Sword has. Now one of the cons that I thought about the Sun Sword was that the blade was a little too short. This weapon was pretty decent in the length of the blade, and the fact that it has a moveset that I'm pretty familiar with, I was able to actually do some decent work with it. With that being said, this is the 3rd straight sword in a row that I've used, and I've been using the straight swords class a whole lot lately. In this video you probably will see some pretty sloppy gameplay. That's mainly due to the fact that me personally, I can't use the same exact type of, I guess, weapon class for very long, because then I start getting a little bit comfortable, my gameplay starts getting a little bit sloppy. I do really need the balancing of using a lot of different weapons to kind of keep myself in check, because once I start getting comfortable I just start really not caring, and in these fights I'm pretty sure you're gonna see some pretty bad mistakes, some fights that I probably could have had really easily, but just kind of let it slip away from me. Keep in mind that I do still win these matches, and for the most part, I'll be honest, I was kind of a little disappointed in the way that I was playing, but I know that was mainly due to the fact that I was using the straight swords class a little too much. I'm actually kind of relieved because I'm pretty much done with the straight swords in the DLC and probably in the game for a good while. I'm kind of glad that I'm going to go ahead and stay away from that class for a little bit, because even though I do love it, too much of it is pretty bad for me. One of the other pros is that it actually, the length of the blade is on par with the Drakekeeper sword, the Fume sword, and the Possessed Armored sword. It's definitely up there with the longest blades of its weapon class, so that's definitely something that some of you guys might like. Some of the straight swords are actually pretty short, and the fact that these past 3 straight swords are actually pretty decent in length, I figured that's also a pretty good pro, because other than the Drake Keeper sword, there really wasn't a straight sword that had some range on it. This is one that does. Now this was actually requested by a whole lot of people. I've had people request the same weapons before, but not so much in a short amount of time. I've been reading all along the internet that people say that this weapon is basically the best straight sword in its class. There's nothing that can compete with it. I don't really agree with that. I don't think that's true. I think there are other weapons that you can use that will outbeat this weapon in a whole lot of categories, not just one. For the most part, I guess it would go on a person's build, but for the most part, this is pretty much a quality build weapon. It has a C and B in scaling. The requirements aren't too high. The fact that it has built-in bleed damage kind of hurts it in the damage output category. All in all, in my opinion, I wouldn't call it the best weapon or the best street sword in the game. I think there are other weapons in its class that can probably outbeat it, but surprisingly enough, this weapon is still pretty good in its own right. Now, coming off of the Fume Sword and the Possessed Armored Sword, I was kind of disappointed in the damage output that those 2 swords were doing. I was kind of expecting the same thing from this weapon as well, but surprisingly enough, this weapon does some pretty decent damage. I was able to play in a pretty aggressive playstyle and still do some really good damage on the people that I was fighting against. So all in all, I was really happy with the damage that I was doing. I'm pretty sure some of you guys, if y'all picked this up, and I'm pretty sure if you guys have stopped using the Possessed Armored Sword and the Fume Sword, you guys might like the damage that it does. Keep in mind that it doesn't do a whole lot of damage, but it does enough to know and to, I guess, be comfortable with. The straight swords themselves don't really do a whole lot of damage, but for some reason, the Possessed Armored Sword and the Fume Sword were doing less than normal. And from somebody who uses the straight sword class like me, those damage outputs were actually pretty disappointing. And surprisingly enough, this one isn't. But that's pretty much going to wrap this up. There's really not much more I can say about this weapon. This is a good weapon. I do recommend people picking it up. It does have a couple things wrong with them, but pretty much every weapon does. I don't call this the best straight sword in the game. That's just my personal opinion. I don't really understand, and I don't really see why people would, but like I said, that's all based on just my personal opinion, my personal experiences. But like I said, that's pretty much going to wrap it up. Leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you haven't already, and until next time, take care.